Mr. Greedy goes shopping. Mr. Greedy was on his way to the shops. He was carrying an enormous shopping bag. It had to be very big to hold all the food Mr. Greedy wanted to buy. Mr. Greedy went to the shops every day. And every day he filled his shopping bag with food. And every day he ate all the food he had brought. Mr. Greedy had written a shopping list. He did not want to forget anything. First, Mr. Greedy went to the Green Grocer.
6 bananas, 3 onions, and 2 pounds of potatoes, please,
said Mr. Greedy. Mr. Mean was in the greengrocer's doing his shopping for the week. I'd like a tomato, 3 grapes, and a small carrot, he said to the greengrocer. Then he remembered that his friends were coming to lunch. Perhaps I'd better have a large carrot this week, said Mr. Mean. There was a market in town that day. It was very crowded. At every stall, people were shouting about the things they had to sell. Teapots and saucepans, cried one. Ripe tomatoes, shouted somebody else. Then Mr. Greedy heard a voice that he knew.
Fresh farm eggs,
bellowed the voice. It was Mr. Noisy. He liked market day. He could shout at the top of his voice without making anybody cross. Mr. Greedy's favourite shop was the baker's. He bought a large loaf of bread for his breakfast and 3 small loaves for his lunch. He also wanted a cake for his tea. Would you like a chocolate cake, a lemon cake, or an orange cake? Asked the baker. Mr. Greedy looked at the cakes on the counter. He could not make up his mind.
I'll have 1 of each,
said Mr. Greedy. He was feeling hungry already, so he ate 1 cake on his way to the next shop. Next door to the baker was the butcher. Mr. Greedy bought 4 lamb chops and some sausages for his dinner. Mr. Muddle came into the shop. I'd like 2 packets of tea, please, said Mr. Muddle. The butcher could see that Mr. Muddle was in a muddle again. This is a meat shop, said the butcher. Sorry, said Mr. Muddle. I'll have 2 bananas then. At the end of the road there was a fish and chip shop. As Mr. Greedy went past the door, he sniffed the air.
Delicious.
It made Mr. Greedy feel very hungry. He went into the shop.
A large portion of chips, please,
he said. Mr. Greedy could see the chips sizzling in the hot fat. He looked at the fried fish and chicken.
I wish I could work in a fish and chip shop,
thought Mr. Greedy. Next, Mr. Greedy went to the supermarket. He picked up 4 tins of baked beans from the first shelf.
I'll buy an extra tin today,
thought Mr. Greedy,
just in case I feel hungry this evening.
Then he moved on to the next row of shelves. He took some chocolate biscuits, a packet of cornflakes, and some jam tarts. It was a good job he had brought such an enormous shopping bag. Mr. Greedy saw Mr. Bump wheeling his trolley down the next row of shelves. At the end of the row there were some packets of sugar in a pile.
"Hello, Mr. Bump,"
called Mr. Greedy. Mr. Bump looked round. "Hello, Mr. Greedy," he replied. "What do you think happened next?" Crash went a packet of sugar. One packet landed on Mr. Bump's head and burst open. 3 packets landed in his trolley. There was sugar everywhere. Soon Mr. Greedy was feeling hungry again. He went into a sweet shop and bought a whole jar of sweets. The shop door opened and Mr. Topsy-Turvy came in backwards. "Afternoon, good," said Mr. Topsy-Turvy. "I'd like a bar of jelly and some chocolate babies, please." The shopkeeper gave him a bar of chocolate and a packet of jelly babies. "Much you very thank," said Mr. Topsy-Turvy. Mr. Greedy wanted to post a letter, so he went to the post office to buy a stamp. There he met Mr. Forgetful. Mr. Forgetful had an envelope in his hand.
"What have you got there?"
asked Mr. Greedy. "It's a birthday card," said Mr. Forgetful. "But I have forgotten whose birthday it is."
"It's Mr. Happy's birthday next week,"
said Mr. Greedy, looking in his diary. "So it is," said Mr. Forgetful. "I must remember to buy him a card." At last Mr. Greedy had brought all the things on his list. His shopping bag was so heavy he could hardly carry it. Every few minutes he had to stop and rest. Then Mr. Greedy thought of a way to make the bag a bit lighter. He took out another one of his cakes and ate it. But the bag was still too heavy. So he took out a bottle of lemonade and drank it. By the time he got home, his bag was nearly empty, and Mr. Greedy was very full. Questions to talk about. Question 1. Why did Mr. Greedy have a big shopping bag? Question 2. Mr. Greedy found someone he knew at the market. Who was he? Question 3. How many cakes did Mr. Greedy buy at the baker's? What sort were they? Question 4. Why did Mr. Greedy want to work in the fish and chip shop? Question 5. What fell on Mr. Bump's head? Question 6. How did Mr. Greedy find out when it was Mr. Happy's birthday? Question 7. Why did Mr. Greedy eat so much on the way home? Thank you for listening.